Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sharing the screen now. The screen is visible.
Yes, sir. It's visible, sir.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee team for giving me this opportunity to share our experience in metal additive manufacturing process. So today's talk, I'll be giving on a smart metal additive manufacturing process. I'm splitting this talk into two parts. First part, I'll try to cover metal additive manufacturing processes, their importance and their issues in metal additive manufacturing process. I'll try to discuss. That will give you an idea about why smart metal additive manufacturing is required. In second half of my talk, I'll concentrate more on the smart metal additive manufacturing process. So if you look at the technology-wise, you can actually, all the technologies you can draw in the Gartner hype cycle. Any technology, we start with the lot of hype. We'll say that all the problem in the world can be solved by this technology. That's how there would be the initial expectation would be there on any technology about that say it can do all the things. Then we'll understand that it's not that as we think that every problem can be solved by this technique, that will lead to a period where which we call disillusionment. Then we try to understand the process better and we try to maximize the potential of this technique. So this is how the next phase, it goes through this process, enlightenment. Finally, we'll reach to a situation where the productive utilization of the technology. So if you ask me, we know that there are polymer 3D printing, we call rapid prototyping. It's reached to this particular stage where polymer 3D printing reached to the productive utilization stage. On the other hand, metal 3D printing, it has reached, though it has started in same time in the late 1980s, metal additive manufacturing stays somewhere here. On the other hand, though I'm not going to discuss the 3D bioprinting, now it has reached to this initial excitement period. So, but today's my talk will be concentrated mainly on the metal 3D printing. So that means there are certain excitement and people lost interest and they start understanding the technique better. Now we are in the stage of enlightenment stage and we start finding newer problem and newer solution in the metal additive manufacturing. So what is that we need to do so that we can reach this particular productive utilization of this particular technology we are going to do. For that, we need smart metal AM technique is required. So that is what I'm going to discuss in the second half of my talk. Okay. So if you look at 3D printing, metal additive manufacturing is not very different. All the 3D printing technology, it goes through this particular cycle. Initial CAD model, creation of STL file, slicing softwares, and creating the tool path. Then where the difference comes? The difference comes at the 3D printers, what we use. So there are different type of technologies available for polymers and different type of technologies are for metals. Within metals, there are wide range of technologies are available. The most of the changes, what we see here is on the 3D printer part. How do we print the parts based on the feedstock material, based on the kind of source to, it can be a heat source, heat source can be laser or can be electron beam or any different sources. So that's how the 3D printers are actually are different. This is where the process is completely different from one 3D printing technique to another 3D printing technology. Okay, first of all, we all have questions when we have to use additive manufacturing. Traditional manufacturings are actually still additive manufacturing. I would say it is actually complementary. It is not going to replace the traditional manufacturing technique, because in traditional manufacturing, as long as the complexity of the part is not very high, the traditional fabrication is, if you look at here, this is fabrication cost, this is a complexity of the part. As long as the complexity of the part in the low and middle range, always the traditional manufacturing would actually be better a bit compared to the additive manufacturing. So additive manufacturing comes into the picture when the complexity of part involved is very high, especially the traditional manufacturing process cannot solve some of the manufacturing problem associated with some of the traditional manufacturing. That in those times we need to use additive manufacturing. That's where the additive manufacturing is a complementary technique. It is not actually going to replace the traditional fabrication process. But when to use? When to use is the quantity. Usually traditional manufacturings are good for large quantity. But if you have small quantity with the unique objects, then we should go for additive manufacturing. Means you require a number of components which is smaller, and at the same time, the time availability for fabrication of final parts. Usually in traditional manufacturing, it would require a minimum of 30 to 45 days. That's a bare minimum from the design to printing of fabrication of the final part. It requires a lot of lead time. But on the other hand, with a small lead time, one can make very complex parts. So these are the key things we need to understand. What is the complexity of the part, the number of parts, the quantity of parts, and time required. So in all these conditions, if it's satisfied, we should go for additive manufacturing. So if you look at additive manufacturing, especially metal additive manufacturing, we have 4 different categories based on powder bed or the it's a feed based process. If you look at here, in this case, if the powder beds are used, it's similar to SLM process in polymer. So in we use bed here, depending on the source to melt the powder. So it can be a selective laser melting process or electron beam melting process. So electron beam melting process, we use electron as a source. In selective laser melting, we use laser as a source. On the other hand, we can use laser as a source to melt the powders. In this case, we don't actually do the, you don't have the powder beds. We actually flow the powder. It's similar to welding. It's like a welding. Instead of the filler materials, you feed the powder to the system. So that will be melted using the laser. So in that way, this will be connected with either 5x6 CNC machine or through robot. One can connect and we can do the process. Instead of powders, one can use wire also. That's what we call wire arc additive manufacturing. So today's my talk, I'll just give a brief about selective laser melting process, because this is something which almost capture. If you look at my next slide, the market share of selective laser melting is around 72%. The next comes the direct energy deposition process. So in our group, we are doing a lot of work in the area of the direct energy deposition process. So I'll concentrate more on how we have done the smart additive manufacturing of the normal DED machine converted into smart additive manufacturing machine, that I'll try to discuss. But since this process, selective laser melting is very widely used, so I'll give a glimpse of that particular technology first, then we'll get into the direct energy deposition process. So if we look at the kind of technology what we have in IIT Jodhpur, so this is a machine that we built from scratch. It is available in my lab. It's a direct energy deposition facility that we built from scratch. So now we actually developed 2 machines. One is there in my lab. Another one actually we work with an industry partner. This is the final machine that we have built for our project. we built in the industry part. These are final machines. It's a direct energy liquefaction. These two machines, it is an indigenous machine we built from scratch. So in addition to that, in IIT Jodhpur, we have laser powder bed fusion machine. This is also we did not build. There is a company in Bangalore. They made this particular selective laser melting laser powder bed fusion machine. In addition to that, we have electron beam melting. This is the first machine in any IIT or ISC in India. It's an electron beam melting additive manufacturing facility. Though I'm not going to discuss about this particular technique in today's lecture. So let us first try to understand what is laser powder bed fusion. I hope into yesterday's lecture by Dr. Vinod would have given the glimpse of this particular process, but I'll just brief this process. I hope I'm not going to repeat it. So if you look at this process, as I told you, we fill a layer of powders. Usually the powders would be in the range of 30 to 40 micrometers. We use the laser source, and the galvo would be depending on the CAD file, what we actually generate. So each layer would be printing layer by layer. Then the bed will be moved down, and again we'll be printing each layer by layer in this process. In this case, feedstock is powder. Laser will actually melt the powder in a localized region depending on the CAD file that we created in that particular layer. The galvo will actually take the different region of the powder bed to melt the laser. Okay, now the question is it all metals and alloys are printable? So we may be thinking that is it all the metals are printable? But the answer is it is not so, because in this process, in powder bed fusion process, for that matter, we call laser powder bed fusion process, or for a DED process, we use laser as a source to melt the powders. In both the case, the absorption of laser is very, very important. We usually use the laser somewhere in this region, 1064 nanometer. It can vary from 950 to 1064 nanometer. Lasers we use. All the materials have different type of absorption. The material should absorb. If the material absorbs only, it can melt the powder. If the material reflects, you cannot melt the powder. If you look at here, I look at here in this particular condition, look at gold, silver, and this I don't know this material. This is silver. This is gold, or not silver. This one is silver and gold, aluminum and copper. You look at here in this condition, gold, silver, and copper. To an extent, it doesn't have any absorption. That means these materials you cannot actually print it. On the other hand, if you look at iron, it has almost 40% of 40 to 45% of absorption. If you take steel, it would be somewhere in the range of 50% of absorption. So 50% of absorption. So depending on the lasers, actually we call these are red lasers. This is very common among the lasers, which is the cheapest one is the red laser. If you really want to print all these other materials, then you have to go to blue laser. Blue laser would be very costly. It is not discussed. This is not very common also. So that means based on the kind of lasers we use and what kind of wavelength of laser that we use, usually we use the wavelength of around 1064 nanometer. So many metals you cannot just like that print it. Okay, there are restrictions which comes from the laser absorption process. So this particular graph will tell you much better idea about how does it works. If you look at here, around 1050 nanometer, this is a standard IR laser. So in this range, nickel, titanium, steel, all these things have significant amount of absorption, so that you can melt the material. Other materials like copper, gold, silver, aluminum, all these materials have very less absorption in this range, so you cannot actually print this material. Now the question is it all type of powders you can print it or not? It usually for any process, for all these process, the particles should be spherical. generally we call thermally sprayable powders. All these powder must be spherical. If it is not spherical, you will not get a uniform powder feeding. So that would have a lot of impact on your final products. Usually all powders are not printable. Okay, the question is, the first thing is it should be spherical. Okay, if it is spherical, whether I can use all the powders, means let's say, what about the size? The size also would vary for different, depending on the different condition, depending on the technology what we use. Especially for, this is for laser powder bed fusion. Usually it is smaller at 15 to 50 micrometer. On the other hand, we used 50 to 150 micrometer, because the bigger the powder, the resolution would be smaller. That we need to understand. But unfortunately, you cannot use smaller size powder for DED, because the powders are flown under the gravity. Though we use carrier gas, it's not good enough to carry the powder very smoothly to the molten pool. So you need to have powders of slightly bigger size. In electron beam melting, there are very complex phenomena. So I'm not going to discuss in detail, but the size is more or less same for electron beam melting and direct energy deposition. But in today's lecture, I will concentrate on powder bed fusion and DED. So I have already discussed about what is the powder bed fusion process. Now we'll get into the direct energy deposition process. So direct energy deposition process also, there are two variants we use. One is based on CNC. Some of the machines based on robot, depending on the requirement. Suppose your interest is on making smaller parts, you should go for CNC based system. If you are interested in making the bigger part, then you should go for robot based system. That's how it works. In terms of now we can look at the how does the technology works. So in this system, the powders are fed through the coaxial nozzle and the laser comes from the center. This powder will melt the laser. Now the whole head will start moving depending on the CAD file that what we are actually giving to the system. This whole motion of this particular laser head and the substrate is controlled by the 5-axis CNC. In 5-axis CNC, this particular system is 5-axis CNC. You are going to have a 3-axis on the top and 2-axis on the bottom. On the other hand, robotic system, which I'll discuss in the next slide, there you can have 5-axis or 6-axis or 8-axis robot, depending on the features that we wanted to have. Hybrid manufacturing is something I'm not going to discuss. It's all about where you can do both printing come machining, because the printed parts usually do not get the good surface finish. One can do both printing and machining and same platform using the CNC. The program wise, it is same, because the program what we use for a CNC machine, similar programs can be just modified little. One can use a similar program for CNC for both printing and machining. You can see now the printing is going on. So one would actually use the same platform, just take out the head, move the head, and you can do the machining also on the same platform. So now the printing is going on. So once we complete the printing, you can do machining also. But there are challenges, though I'm not going to discuss. It is not, though it has been invented long back, but it is not under in real practice, because there are certain issues are there in terms of understanding in terms of utilization of the process. So the technique what I have in my lab is very similar to the this particular robot-based system. So it is very similar, where you are going to have 6 axes on the top. The bed is going to have 2 axes. It will rotate and it will tilt, and the other 6 axes come from robot. it's more or less similar. The only the major advantage is that you can go for a very big components. In CNC, you can actually your bed sizes means your the volume of the part is decided by your bed size. Okay. As I told you, in direct energy deposition, one can make a very big parts. That's what you can see here. You can make very big parts in direct energy deposition process. So in addition to that, it is very useful for repair manufacturing, especially the turbine blades, where you need to have a proper control over the crystallographic orientation, which cannot be achieved by normal welding technique. Repair manufacturing is one of the major advantage with the direct energy deposition process. Another thing is one can make functionally graded material, which is having a lot of interest using this particular direct energy deposition. One can make multi-material because you can feed different type of powders at different layer, and same layers also one can have a different type of powders. You can make composites. You can make a graded composites using this particular technique, which is a very useful for various application. So if we look at the technique wise vis a vis, why do we use in certain condition direct energy deposition, certain condition we use DED process? If you really want, as I told you, if you really want a big part, the laser DED is better. The laser DED is better. And but if your part complexity is very high, then we should go for powder bed fusion, because in powder bed fusion you don't have any design constraint. You can print any complex parts in a powder bed fusion process. The powder size, which I already discussed. One thing I did not actually discuss earlier, though we use in both the case laser, but usually we use 100 watt to 500 watt in a powder bed fusion process. On the other hand, in a DED process, we start with 200 so we start with the 200 watts. So we start with 200 watts. So in this process, we use 200 watts. Then we go up to. So let me just restart this part. Sometimes it's a problem. I'll just explain meantime. In DED, we start with the 500 watts. We go up to 3000 watts because you need slightly higher laser power. Obviously, the more higher laser power and more the size of the particle, your surface finish would be poorer. On the other hand, one can actually print the part very fast. Yeah, I'm just starting that again. If you have any questions, you can actually start posting on the comment box so that I can start addressing it. Is it my screen is visible? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So as I told you, like we are using a 200 watts here. On the other hand, we use higher laser power in this particular condition. So because of this more power and the coarse particles, you will always get good layer thickness and your productivity would be very fast. But on the other hand, surface finish would be a problem. If you really want a good surface finish, you should go for a powder bed fusion process. The build rate, as I told you, since we are using higher laser power and my layer thickness is higher and bigger powder, so that would give me a very high build rate. The scan speeds, it's in terms of productivity, DED is better. Multi-material capacity, as I told you, DED is better. And the repair one can do this in this process. The design freedom, as I told you, design freedom is low when you compare with powder bed fusion process. In powder bed fusion process, the design freedom is extremely high. It's like my polymer printer. You can give any design and you can actually print the part. Okay. This part I already told, which this is actually 13% of market share. This has 72% of market share. Okay, now we'll get into the part of smart manufacturing. Till now, I have discussed conventional manufacturing process. Now, when you look at the quality of the part object that we make, it depends on many parameters. One thing is you need to have an accurate dimensional accuracy that you need. Again, dimensional accuracy, because it coming because of the accuracy of each deposited layer, then the volumetric accuracy. Okay, this depends on what kind of scan strategy we use, accuracy of the deposited tracks, 3D model resolution, layer thickness, powder particle size. As I told you, higher the bigger the layer thickness, your accuracy would be lower. Again, the bigger the powder and particle size and morphology, the lower would be your accuracy. In addition to that, the final part what you make, it should have a consistent mechanical property. It should meet the design requirement in terms of its outcome. The final product should meet the design engineers what really they need, the component mechanical property. But those things are largely affected because when you do this process, we have more than 100 to 150 parameters which can control the entire additive manufacturing process. It is very difficult to control all these parameters. Again, whatever may be optimum parameters for a single one layer, it is not necessarily an optimum parameter for a next layer. So that means we need to make this machine completely smart so that it can identify an optimum parameters on its own. That is very important for making the parts which are repeatable microstructure and mechanical property without any major defect. Okay, so if you really want to have the minimum defects and chemical homogeneity, we need to have smart metal AF process. But all these parameters variation usually people do with the conventional traditional method by making the parts and then do the microstructure and mechanical property. Then you vary the parameters, you do this process. By doing this process, even any new material, you need a time of 1.5 to 2 years to identify an optimum process parameters. Okay, what is the alternate option? Alternate option is do a modeling process. Either you can do a CFD simulation, heat transfer and fluid flow simulation. Yes, you can do it. Usually then let's say that I want to print, let's say go one layer from here to here. This will be done in 30 seconds. For that condition, if you want to do a simulation process, it will take 30 days. Imagine for making a full component, running a simulation is not possible. But usually we do a simulation to run for a single layer. Maybe you can do a multiple layer, fine. But the thing is, even for doing identifying optimum condition without doing experiment, one can actually do it, but you need to spend a lot of time on that. What is an alternate option? That's where we are going to come into a technique called real-time monitoring. Means in situ monitoring of this process using several sensors. One can understand what exactly the process happens during this additive manufacturing process. As I told you, there are various type of sensors are available. In our lab also, we have various type of sensors. But the thing is, each sensors will give you information from the, so if you look at this whole process, you can consider this is your bed. something happens in the below the surface, and something happens on the above the surface. So usually most of this technique will give you what happens on the above the surface. It can be the geometry of the melt pool or the plasma flume, whatever it comes from that top of the surface. But nothing gives you what happens inside. But this, what happens below the surfaces, which is important, which actually influence your final outcome of your microstructure, defect, and property. But most of the techniques cannot provide that kind of information, except few techniques which I will discuss a little bit later. One is this part. Another thing is we need to do, one is a monitoring. Monitoring means I can identify the defect. Okay, I can identify the defect. But identification of defect is not good enough, because I need to control it so that a defect won't form. That is what we call closed loop control, which I will discuss a little bit later. Okay, now let us look at real-time monitoring. This is a real-time monitoring which we use high-speed camera. One can get the powder distribution, powder size, and the flowability. One can understand the melt pool width. One can understand using high-speed camera. The spatter formation one can understand using this high-speed camera. These are our own results. So this is one of the interesting technique, though it cannot be connected with this normal machines. This required a synchrotron facility. So we do not have anything in India at this point of time, or else you need to have very high resolution X-rays. So this one is. You can see here what happens, as I told you, what happens on this surface. I need to understand what happens on this subsurface. This particular techniques will give you an idea about these are defects. These are the defects which is forming. And this understanding is very important. This can be done using X-ray imaging, but this technique will give you only idea about how does the defect form. You cannot actually use it for control the defects. You can see here all this information one can very nicely, you can get it. On the other hand, one can easily control the defect using IR camera, which I will discuss a little bit later. One can use IR camera to understand the melt pool width, length, temperature distribution, solidification rate. One can understand. And also you can identify whether there are defects are formed, keyhole defect is formed, or lack of fusion defect is formed. But these techniques, usually it comes in the form of video. Then video should be converted into image. Then you need a deep learning algorithms to identify the classification of defects. In real time, it would be a very complicated process. You will get a large volume of data, so which is very difficult to analyze by human eyes, and you need a very sophisticated computational algorithms, like a deep learning algorithms are required. Even with the deep learning algorithm, you will have a large volume of data which is not useful for when you are running this machine. This machine runs 2-3 days continuously to make the parts. So getting that, you will get several terabytes of volume of data that you get. So it is analyzing the data would be of a very difficulty. But this technique has the advantage of looking at this one coaxially. One can actually understand how this the temperature profile occurs during the printing. You can understand using this process. This is one of the real-time monitoring technique people use. IR-based process. Okay, now we'll come to this technique. What kind of defects that we will be getting? Usually we get the lack of fusion defects. We get keyhole defects, and we also will get balling, and we also get spatters. So all this to understand all these defects, what we'll do usually, as I told you, there are many parameters, but usually we control these two parameters, keeping all the parameters constant. These are the two major parameters. One is the powder laser power and the velocity under which we work. So usually you can get a optimum processing window for additive manufacturing. This is how one would actually do this parameter optimization by doing a trial and error. I'll tell you, let's say I have identified optimum processing window, optimum laser power and velocity identify, keeping the other parameter constant. So what would happen? The optimum parameters are, now I'm building with the optimum parameter. Now you see the first few layers, it was working perfectly. Now the moment I get into the more number of layers, I could see that the part is getting deformed. Okay, it is not actually printing as per my requirement. Okay, you will get this kind of, you see here that first few layers, you will get parts properly. Means though I am using optimum processing condition, that optimum process condition is optimum for only for few layers, especially when we use direct energy deposition, especially when we make thin layers, it is going to be a problem, because when you start the first layer, the heat transfer occurs through three different mechanisms. One is conduction, convection, and radiation. The moment you build the part, more number of, let's say you go 10, 15 layers, then you start seeing that heat transfer should occur only through the conduction mode. So obviously there will be enough heat accumulation would occur in the process. If you look at here, the parts, when you start initially, you will have some amount of melt pool width. You see that the part is getting continuously deformed. It will start moving in different direction. I don't know, some of those who worked in wire additive manufacturing, you would see that something like this. The parts would be going this way. So this is because of this heat accumulation part. So there is a technique called, as I told you, the IR camera. IR camera, one can control the clamor, means there is something called clamor technology. So using this technology, one can control using this IR camera, one can control the melt pool width. You can understand. By understanding melt pool width, continuously you decrease the power what you are giving through the laser. One can control by keeping your melt pool width as constant. One can easily print it by, you can see here. So when we start with 1400 is our laser power. Finally, we'll end up with 700 is our laser power. That means continuously I'm changing the power, means the continuously power requirement is getting changed. I'm trying to decrease it. Okay, but this technique will not give you what happens below the surface, because we are actually putting a camera on the top. So at best you can measure this particular melt pool width. Okay, so now I'll come to the work what we are doing in our lab. Okay, we have integrated CMOS camera, high-speed camera, dual color pyrometer, multi-wavelength pyrometer, thermocouples, scanners, optical emission spectrometer, acoustic sensor, all these things that we have integrated in our system. We use real-time monitoring using all these tools, and our closed loop control we do with optical emission spectroscope. I think the only one group in India, no one else is doing in India this kind of work. So what benefit that we get here is, as I told you, in image-based system like high-speed camera or IR camera or CMOS camera, you will get a lot of image, you will get image distortion, you will get a lot of false data. You will never get the melt pool depth information, which is very, very important to understand this additive manufacturing process. You get large volume of data, very slow signal processing, all this problem that we have. On the other hand, when I use this particular technique of optical emission spectrometer, so one can easily do the defect detection, defect characterization, real-time melt pool geometry analysis. I can get in this particular technique, I get signal at every 1 millisecond, which I can correct it by another 1 millisecond. Every 2 milliseconds, I can actually correct the overall process. So this is a very efficient tool for closed loop. This is what we call smart manufacturing. Means without touching the machine, this whole system can automatically control on its own. It will identify the automatically and the optimum parameters, not only for first layer, it will identify optimum parameters for every layer, every location of the sample, immaterial of what kind of parameters that we are airing, whether you are using laser power, whether you're changing your type of powder, doesn't matter. It will actually do on its own. Okay, I'll not get into the too much of details. This is how the sensor looks like. The sensor should actually, this is we call collimator. We should need to keep the sensor as close as possible, which is not easy. But we have come up with some sort of technology we call a collimating probe lens. Using that, we were able to go very close to the means where we are printing. So we were able to bring down the noise so that you will get a very good signal to noise ratio. So this led to give us 2 patents. So what do we measure actually? What do we measure is something when we actually do the laser metal interaction, there will be plasma would be created above the top of the surface. This plasma, what is coming, we actually take it to the detector that would measure the plasma plume intensity. Okay, so the plasma plume intensity, it will be something like this. The plasma plume intensity will have a different spectrum. It will have a spectrum with a different wavelength. Each would correspond to each peak correspond to a particular element. Okay. Again, these are arbitrary unit. Arbitrary unit means if you change the distance between the plasma plume, the region of plasma plume and your sensor, it will vary. The angle, if you change, it will vary. Everything would be changing. So that way, so now you have to convert this information, arbitrary unit, into meaningful information. So that's where we have done a lot of work on making that calibration to make this information what we get to making a meaningful information. So that led to 6 patents in this particular area. So now we have what we have done based on all the analysis, we have identified one particular wavelength which is of very useful for this particular analysis. We took this particular spectrum and we try to correlate with the Melpool width. I'll not get into the too much of detail of all these things. So Melpool width and intensity. In fact, that was clearly establishing 2 parts. One is the conduction regime, another one is keyhole regime. As long as you are in conduction regime, that you will be getting good Melpool geometry that would be giving you parts without any defects. Then once you jump into this keyhole regime, there will be a lot of defects. So similar way, we have tried to correlate with the Melpool dip with the plasma plume intensity. Again, in this case also, you get a non-linear correlation between this one. Then we were able to get the conduction to keyhole region transition. But it is, people have identified a similar kind of shape change in occurs when we use laser intensity with Melpool with depth and depth versus energy density. In all these cases, the features are more or less similar. Observation one can observe. One is initially conduction mode, then there will be a transition regime would occur. From then it will go to the keyhole mode. It's sort of not much interest. So now, so we were able to connect, because ideally what we wanted to know is what is the connection between, so if you look at here, this is we call Melpool width. This is we call Melpool depth. Okay, this is very important to understand, because in some case, what would happen, the Melpool width would, because what we generally measure is Melpool width. Melpool width would be same, but Melpool width would be, depth would be different. That is something which is very important. So in this process, we were able to easily capture the Melpool depth and width using this particular technique. Okay, I'll not get into the too much of details. Using this particular technique, what we were able to identify, the each intensity what I get, using the intensity which I told is an arbitrary unit. By understanding this arbitrary unit, one can get on whether you are in keyhole regime, or you are in a transition regime, or even you are in ideal processing window, or you are in a lack of fusion mode. So we were able to capture it. That we have validated with the experiment. When I did experiment with a lack of fusion regime, which actually identified by this particular spectrum, and that has been validated with the experiment. It is shown Laka fusion. When I use the best parameter for clad and we using a tomography, we identify there was no defect. I'll not get into the detail of this particular technique. And when we work in the keyhole regime, we were identifying certain sort of sinusoidal peaks were actually forming. So each collapse of this particular this corresponds to keyhole collapse. What we identified is we could able to see that there are porosities were forming in that region. This is what we identified. These are the region we identified porosity, probability of pore formation. There is experimentally observed porosity in a similar location. That means we are able to identify where does this defects would be forming, all sort of defects, whether it's a lack of fusion, is in conduction mode or in the keyhole mode, all those things we were able to identify. That's another patent that we have filed using this particular technique. There are some cases we may not able to identify accurate position, which I'll not discuss. So now, until now, what I have done, we were able to identify all the features available, features required for identification of defect have done. Now we have developed a hardware, we have developed a software for our closed loop control. Means now I'm going to control the process. You can see here. So now the intensity, whatever I'm getting without any control, means I'm keeping that. In this case, I'm changing means controlling the laser power. Because whenever it increases, when it goes up, then I'm controlling, because I'm getting a threshold, like what we do in furnace, I'm keeping that value down by decreasing the laser power. So you can see here. So you can see here, this is without control. This is with control. If we look at the part, what we make without control, this is with control. With control means this is work with the smart manufacturing. You can see that the geometry accuracy of the parts would be very, very good. On the other hand, where you don't have control, it would be actually going in all the direction. It will give a lot of defects also. So in addition to that, the software what we have created will give you all the features required for printing. One can actually see in the dashboard. So it will give you idea about what laser intensity we have, what power we are using, what kind of plasma plume height we are getting, whether we are working in a lack of fusion mode, conduction mode, transition mode, keyhole mode. We can get some live details of melt pool depth, melt pool width, and depth aspect ratio. All these things are important. This will give you an idea about whether you are in appropriate printing condition or not. So now you can see that quantitative difference. This is without closed loop. You can see that this is my ideal CAD geometry. You can see there is a deviation from the CAD geometry. So on the other hand, when I use closed loop control, you are able to get very accurate parts with this close to CAD geometry. Then with all this intensity map, we translated in the form of the XYZ axis. Then we were able to identify these are the location I'm supposed to get porosities. You can see here we are getting porosity. This is what actually our system is detecting. This region I'm supposed to get porosity. I'm getting it the porosity. So when I print with the closed loop, I don't get any porosity. So this shows there is no porosity. You can see here very clearly no porosity. It's only the delta phase which is forming. It's because of non-equilibrium conditions, not a porosity. So beauty here is, as I told you, when you don't have any control, if you see here, I start with 1.6 mm. When I go on top, then you can see the deformation of the part is happening. So that is making, if you see here, the deformation of part is happening. It means it is instead of forming like this, it is going this way. So there will be a deformation of parts. You see the melt pool width would be continuously changing. On the other hand, if I do a closed loop control, what we are doing, you can able to get throughout the whole. This is a 54 layer. All the layers we get consistent melt pool width. Not only melt pool width. You can see here melt pool depth. Initially, we start with 465. When I go to the top of the layer, around the 54th layer, I'm getting 1500 micrometer. On the other hand, when I go with closed loop, we start with 340 micrometers. Even on the top layer, I'm getting 340 micrometers. No change. Even the properties are reflecting. If you look at the properties, we have taken the hardness as a number of layers. You can see the hardness varies from 150, especially in the bottom of the layer, you see it's around 250, around 225, 250 we are getting. On the bottom, on the top of the layer, we are getting 150 because of the defect on the parts. On the other hand, we get a very uniform mechanical property when you do a closed loop control. Okay, so I thank this funding agency, Department of Science and Technology. They gave us around 7.6 crore to build that metal additive manufacturing facility, and Science and Technology SCRB board, which gave us around 60 lakhs to develop the technology for optical emission spectroscope. And currently, the ISRO is funding us to use acoustic sensor to identify the defects. The student who was working on this project is funded by Prime Minister Research Fellowship Scheme. Thank you.
Participants, if you have any questions, you can ask.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, 1 minute. Yeah.
Sir, this manufacturing thing, sir, it's very new to us. The students want to explore those things. So what they can do for that, sir?
1 minute. 1 minute. What is the question? What is your question? Hello.
Sir, this equipment and this instruments are very new also.
Okay.
Hello, can you able to hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear. Yes, yes.
Hello.
Yes, yes. Hello.
Yes, sir. But
True.
if the students want to explore those things, if they want to get a job or if they want to do any internship, and also what they can do for that, sir?
See, actually, these equipments are actually very costly. Even I don't operate this machine. Only few who are getting trained on this machine only operates. It's around each machine, if you import it, say 5-6 crore. But there are places they give training. So we actually, for our project, we use this machine. So, but these machines are actually not actually meant for all. Okay. Polymer printing machines are very similar. One can actually buy less than 1 lakh, and people can understand and use it because conceptually it is similar. But there are metal machines are very costly. You cannot actually have access. Very few places they will allow you to use these machines. So it is not possible because this maintenance of equipment is also very complex. It's a lot of money is involved. I don't think that anybody will allow you to access the machine. Just you can get trained on this machine. It is very unlikely. Again, even if you ask me, when we got machine here in IIT Jodhpur, we invited people, 30 people for training. It usually it required 1 week or 10 days of training. Then people actually last day I could see only 3-4 students who get trained. So this is what happens. Even if you are interested, you want to learn it, but you need to spend a lot of time to learn this technique. Currently, I don't see that kind of patience is there with students. Okay, they wanted to get an instantaneous solution. It is not happening. So both the machines, the new machines, when I was in charge, we called for around 30 students. Finally, I could see 1 or 2 students only. 1 or 2 students only could learn that technique.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sir, if there are any PG research scholar or PG students, if they want to do testing in that, so is there any availability will be there? We can do testing.
Testing of what?
Like if you want to do any laser cutting like that, you mentioned some powder technique, no, sir. So if you want to
this will see the machine what we use, we don't have laser cutting. I would say it is actually easy to build wire arc additive manufacturing. The basic concept is more or less same. You do not have to get into laser DED. Wire arc additive manufacturing can be easily built within, if you don't use robot, even with a robot with a limited access, 3 axis, one can build this machine in 3-4 lakhs or maybe less than 5 lakhs, one can build it. Okay, so there are ways of actually accessing this machine, and then wire additive manufacturing is, I think, more or less it is people can easily access. So availabilities are there. Laser-based systems are very costly. Another thing is extremely dangerous also. Okay, you have to have a lot of safety. That's why we don't allow many students to operate also. It's extremely safety is a major issue in laser. When we operate laser, it has to be have to take a lot of safety precautions. Yeah. Any other question? Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes, yes.
Yes, I am Manik Patil from BITS Pilani, Goa, PhD student, sir.
Yes, yes.
I
Yes,
am
ma'am.
I'm trying to do the simulation of this DED process, direct energy deposition process, to
Okay.
predict the cooling rate and residual stress.
Okay.
So, is it possible to do it for bimetallic structure or multi-material?
In principle, it is possible. Say, bimetallic materials means what? You wanted to make within a layer, you want to have two metal, or you want to print a graded layer, let's say, you will have 10 layers with one material, another 10 layers with another material. Is it like
Yeah,
that?
graded one, 60-40% or 70-30% like that.
See, graded one would be a difficult because you need to give parameters or thermophysical
Yeah.
parameters.
Yes,
Both.
yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Then what kind of mixing occurs in the system also one need to understand.
Okay.
Principle, it is possible because it's like a dissimilar joint welding of material. The conceptually, the welding can be simulated, dissimilar joining can be simulated. In principle, this also can be simulated. Only thing is you are changing the heat source. Modeling wise, whatever you do on welding can be, it is extendable to this particular process. Only thing, there are slight physics is different for laser, but otherwise it's more or less similar.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other question?
I guess there are no questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time and wonderful session.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining, and I hope I would like to interact with all the people physically. That will be a better session because when you do online, it is not really efficient. Okay, so it is fine. Maybe whenever I come, that's fine.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. To conclude the today's session, I invite Dr. Rosen Xavier, Assistant Professor of Bethlahem Institute of Engineering, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It is my distinct honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks for this enriching online FDP on behalf of Bethlahem Institute of Engineering. First and foremost, a heartfelt thank to our esteemed resource person, Dr. K.R. Ravi, for gracing this virtual platform and such profound, valuable expertise on smart metal additive process. Your ability to simplify complex topics and engage us all, even in this online setting, was truly remarkable. I extend my deepest appreciation to all the dedicated faculty members and participants who joined us from various places, actively engaging in the question and answer session and discussion. Your enthusiasm and valuable questions truly enhance the learning environment. The FDP has equipped us with practical tips, new perspectives on and a clearer path forwarded in our academic pursuits. Thank you all once again for your presence, active participation, and making this event a grand success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, dear participants, in the feedback link for today's session is shared in the chat box. Okay, if you please finish it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.